This is the setup. I've got the amazing Chloe with some red fabric over the top of her. Now she's being lit by two lights. I've got a key light up here, which is an LED continuous light, and behind I've got a second LED acting as a separation light, and it's separating Chloe out from the black background. Now we're going to take a few photos like this and some photos without Chloe in the scene where we're waving the fabric around, bring them all together in Photoshop, and this is what the final photo will look like. But of course it didn't start right here, so let's rewind and break it down. To help me out today, I've got the amazing Chloe. Chloe's going to be the model for this photo session, and it all starts with something really simple and basic, which is a basic black background. Now that's going to help enormously when it comes to the Photoshop part and layering up the red fabric, and for exactly the same reason, Chloe is wearing a black dress. Now we'll get to the Photoshop bit in a little while, but first we need to take some photos, and that means we need to sort out the lighting. Today, I'm not going to be using flash because I want to have a degree of movement in the fabric. We'll get to that too, but that means I'm going to use continuous LED lights. So I've got a small light up here. This is a Xuan Molus G200, and to be honest, it's only set to 20% power, so we're not exactly using a lot of it. I've got a grid on it because I want to direct the light towards Chloe and not towards my background. I need to keep that black. We could just take a picture like this. In fact, let's do that. Let's see how it looks in this lighting with that light on Chloe. And it looks pretty good, except that's not the whole story. Because if I turn this light off, now this is the room lights on its own. Now usually with flash, we'd do no flash, no picture, but that's not happening today. So we need to do no room lights, no picture. I haven't turned all of the room lights off so you can still see me in the video, but I've done them enough that it's going to affect the exposure a significant amount. So I've gone with a shutter speed of a 60th of a second, which is going to be enough to keep Chloe in focus without too much camera shake. A tripod is definitely helping. I've got f5.6 because I want to get an aperture with enough depth of field to get Chloe in focus and some of the fabric. And my ISO I'm running at 400. And with those settings, no extra light gives me almost no picture. So let's add in the light for this scene. So I've got a single light and it's off to the side. Now I'm going to explain why, but first I'm going to give this to Chloe. There we go. That's some fabric that Chloe's going to put over her head. Now you might think, why don't I put the light sort of 45 degrees, classic lighting position? And it's because I want to get a little bit of texture into the scene. Now this fabric has a little bit of texture, but if I lit it straight from the front, it would just come out flat. So by putting a side light in, I'm going to maximize those shadows, but I do create a bit of a problem for myself. Let's go have a look and see how this comes out. Quick little test photo. I mean, as it stands, it's a beautiful picture because, well, it's Chloe and she is always amazing. But you can see on the left-hand side of this picture, it kind of drifts into shadow. And that is where my second light's going to come in. So let's put a light to lift those shadows. And that light's going to be this, which is another Xuan light. This is the Cinepeer C100. It's a 100 watt light, which is way too bright for what we need because once again, it's actually at 20%. But usefully, it comes with barn doors. Now that means I can actually adjust the light so I know it's going to hit Chloe, but I can also make sure that it doesn't reach the background because I don't want this black to go grey. I can also stop it hitting my lens of my camera to reduce flare and lower the contrast that way. Okay, let's see how that looks. Quick little test photo. And that adds that little edge of light on Chloe's arm and also lights the opposite side of the fabric. And that essentially is this setup done. Chloe, are you ready? Let's take a few photos like this. I'm using a 60th of a second as my shutter speed, and that might cause some problems if we get any rapid movement from Chloe. Chloe's not going to move that fast, but if her arms are moving too quickly, it might cause a little bit of blur. I actually don't mind the fabric blurring because, well, stick around and you'll find out why, but I don't want Chloe's eyes to blur. Rather than just letting the fabric hang straight down on Chloe, I'm going to wrap it around and try and create a bit of a random pattern to the fabric. And I'm doing this because I have just a tiny piece of fabric to work with. I'm going to photograph it again and again and add them all together in Photoshop, and I think it's going to help it to blend together more if the fabric has a random pattern to it. With the main photos done, we've got just one last thing to do, and that is to take our small piece of netting and make it look a lot bigger. So the plan is this: I'm going to get the netting to move, and I'm going to take photos using a slower shutter speed. So I've changed my settings to a 20th of a second at f8 because I want more depth of field, because there's no guarantee it's going to go in the plane of focus that I start in. 20th of a second will give me a bit more movement and blur, which is what I'm after for this. And it's as unsophisticated as that. It's worth noting I'm using exactly the same lighting for this setup as I did with Chloe, so when I bring the images together in Photoshop, they look pretty much seamless. At least that's the idea. Let's jump into Photoshop and find out. I'm going to use this picture of Chloe because her eyes are nice and sharp, there's plenty of detail in the netting, and the netting that falls across her has a nice random pattern, which is going to be in keeping with the extra netting. Remember, I only had a tiny amount of it to work with, which is this sort of picture. And these work because they have blur, but also sharpness to them as well. It's a fine balance, but you'll see how this works. So let's add that in. First of all, I'm going to press Control A, Command A on a Mac to select it all, then Control C or Command C on a Mac to copy it, and then back to my main picture, Control V or Command V on a Mac to paste it in. Now to blend the two layers together, I'm going to change the layer blending mode from normal to screen, and well, that's basically it. Let's repeat that process with another picture. So here's another one. This one is a bit more full screen, so I'm going to press Control A, Control C, back to my main picture, paste it in, and this time when I change the layer blending mode to screen, it is a little bit too strong. I'm kind of losing a bit too much Chloe here, so I'm going to get a layer mask, which is this little rectangle with a circle in the middle down the bottom of the layers panel, and then get a paintbrush, get the brush tool, make sure my brush foreground color is black, and then just paint some black with a nice big soft brush. Just dab it in over Chloe, just so I can sort of blend everything together a little bit like that. Now it is missing a little bit on the right hand side as we look at this, so let's go grab another picture and do the same process again and paste it in. Change the layer blending mode to screen, and I know what you're thinking. Well, that one had absolutely nothing on the right hand side to fill in. In fact, there's a hand on the right hand side now. Well, that's fine because I can drag this across with the move tool and we can pop it something, yeah, like that looks about right. There is a bit of an obvious dividing line. So once again, I'm going to put a layer mask on that layer with the brush tool, and we'll just paint that out so we can hide the join, something like that. There we go. So I've now got an effect that looks like loads of fabric moving around in the picture when in fact we only had a tiny amount of fabric, and I could stop here, but there's a couple of extra things I want to do, and the main one is go to layer, and then I'm just going to flatten this image down, and then I'm going to apply a bit of a blur using a filter, blur gallery, and iris blur, or center spot clear as we used to call this back in the old days. And that allows me just to change the amount of blur. You can see if I go way too far how this works. So I'm just going to put a little bit of blur and rotate it around a little bit, and you can change the feathering for the blur and play around with that to your heart's content, but that's going to help to blur the moving areas with the sharp areas and just create a bit more of a seamless composition. You could stop here, but I'm going to do a few extra things. I'm going to give this a bit of a vignette. I'm going to change the contrast a little bit and tweak the colors, because that is my final picture completed. There's lots of ways I could have changed the results of this setup. The first and most easy would have been just to have bought more of this red netting fabric, but this is all I had, and it did steer the whole photo session rather nicely. I also could have used flash, which would have given me different results, not necessarily better or worse, but definitely different. Instead, I chose to use continuous light, and it leads me to a question. there are so many continuous lights coming now. LED is definitely growing faster than flash. So would you like to see more LED portrait work right here on Adorama TV? If you would, let me know in the chat down below. Whilst you're down there, check out the gear links, and of course, give this video a thumbs up if you've made it this far. I guess you've enjoyed it. And of course, if you haven't already done so, you should definitely have clicked on that subscribe button some time ago. So go give it a click. I'm Gavin Hoey. Thanks for watching.